Western therapy does not work on Eastern minds.
Yes. Parents in the West, I mean, at like 16, they're like, okay, go live your life. Our parents are like, you will never leave my home.
Yeah.
You are my baby. I'm like 40 years old. You are my baby. No, dude. Like,
They'll say this like, I'm glad I was beaten up as a kid. Like, it made me into the man that I am today. And, you know, like, these kids today are too soft and stuff.
Ilham,
Sabah.
have you have you ever been to therapy?
Yes, I have. One time.
Yeah.
Briefly.
Just the one time. I imagine it was brief.
Briefly, yeah.
I have been to, I think, 6 first therapy sessions. One had stuck, and the more I was working with this therapist, the more things were becoming clear to me. And then, you know, I would end my session and I would go sit at dinner with my family, and I would just be like, you, and you. And then eventually my dad one day was just like, I don't think you should do therapy anymore. And I was like, why? And he goes, because I'm tired of everything being my fault. And I was like, but it is your fault. And therapy and parents and anxiety and stress are going to be our topic for today.
I'm so excited to talk about it because this is something that I've always been fascinated with. And we were actually talking about this off camera, and there's so many things that I want to talk about.
I'm literally like salivating.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I'm so excited. And we have an incredible guest to do this with.
Absolutely. So let's talk about therapy with therapist extraordinaire.
You have to say her name.
Anum Lakhani.
I thought we were bouncing.
Welcome to the pod.
Anum
Thank
Lakhani.
you.
How's it going?
It's going all right. Ish.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you.
Let's talk about that.
So this time we're the ones who are going to be asking like all the therapy related questions. I'm really enjoying being on this side for once. Yeah. So tell me, we were talking about this off camera actually. Therapy. Why is it that Sabah keeps blaming her family?
So it's interesting that you had that experience, because I had that experience when I was like training to be a therapist for not a few months, like a couple years.
Nice.
My mom actively came and said like, are you sure this is good for you? Like, you used to be such a happy person. And I was like, nah, I was a cheerful person. Yeah. Now I'm a more like honest person, and that I am, a lot more angry.
Ooh,
but it was
that's a very profound statement. You said I was a cheerful person, but not necessarily a happy one.
So when I moved back from college, like I moved back to Karachi, I was very functional. I was super like cheerful, but I had no idea how deeply depressed I was. And therapy was not like normalized at all back then. There were barely any conversations on mental health, and it was my sister who first suggested like, maybe you want to go to a therapist. What you're describing sounds a lot like it's not just your life is difficult, but you're going through something. And I had that standard reaction of no, I can deal with this on my own. So I didn't start therapy until I started training to become a therapist.
Can I ask what made you think about training to be one?
I'd tried a bunch of different professions. I was initially in law school. I did my undergrad in English Lit.
Okay.
It did not work out.
I was going to say, historically a very lucrative thing that our parents love when we go into literature.
Maybe that's why your mom's like, hello. Don't switch careers.
Yeah, I did not start out wanting to become a therapist at all. But it was just like I did this self-development course that was the first in a series of like trainings to become a therapist. And it kind of like led me to this path where I had to, like, it was compulsory for people to be in therapy for a couple years. And that's, that kind of like turned my world around. It made me realize a lot of what I'd been going through. I also didn't get into this profession for the purpose that a lot of people do, which is like to help people. I got into it because the work was interesting.
How long have you been a practicing therapist?
7 years.
So in 7 years, me getting bashed in the face with my own mic, have you seen the evolution of like human behavior where you're like, 3 years ago, this is not the way people reacted to things, but I'm seeing more of it now?
Absolutely. So when I started out, things like self-compassion, like positive affirmations, positive psychology, that was like, this is the direction we all need to go in. The last couple of years, it's drastically changed in that we've learned a lot of it was, it's kind of like bred a lot of narcissism in society. There's been a lot of
Sorry,
like.
I'm laughing because Elhaam looked deep into my eyes when she was like, so no. She's like, listen.
No. It's not just you. We're going to get into it. There are
She's about
some
to text Siren.
generational. It's a generational thing too.
Yeah. But there's a show on Netflix called Beef, in which one of the main characters,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah,
very
yeah.
famous line from it is he goes, Western therapy does not work on Eastern minds.
Yes.
Really about this whole thing. And I love that you got us here. Why don't we get into it then?
Absolutely.
Generational
trauma. I would really like to know. There's lots of different elements to it, right? It's
Beyond
not just
blaming Abu and Mummy
yes,
for
for God,
everything.
for God's sakes, your
Yeah.
poor father. Please say sorry.
No.
I mean, generational trauma is, yes, about like acknowledging a lot of what's been passed down to you. But at the same time, it's also about like developing awareness and compassion of what our parents went through. Like our experiences are so wildly different. They were so like geared towards survival that the idea of self-determination is still a relatively alien concept to them. They're still stuck in survival.
Parents grew up in a very different world. I mean, I sit and have conversations with my grandmother, and half the time I'm just like, I can't understand that you went through all of this. I mean, there were times when they were sitting in their homes and there were bombs dropping around them, and I can't even think of that because it hasn't happened to me here. Yes, it's happening in the world, but the generation that's below us, Gen Z, is what I really want to break down.
Before that, did your family migrate during partition?
No, they were here.
They were here. What about yours?
Mine migrated.
Okay.
And there's more stuff about like people getting married at incredibly young ages. Like there was sexual violence, and a lot of it was so normalized that if you try talking to them about it, even now, they're still just saying, yeah, but it was normal at the time.
There's still like the world around us is constantly changing, and we keep forgetting about the fact that it's in constant flux.
Yeah.
And then we look at the generation below us, and sometimes, you know what, sometimes I sound like my dad. When I talk to these kids, sometimes I'm just like, you don't know, and then I'm like, oh my god, I was on the other end of this. Like,
I'm
just
turning into my
yesterday.
dad too.
Yeah.
More and more by the day. So my grandmother as well, like when she moved, she was a kid. She didn't know she was moving.
Yeah.
They just told her like, yeah, like go to sleep, or just she was put on a boat, like, yeah, we're just going for a short visit, and like next thing she knew, she was in a completely different country.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff, it happened to a lot of people. But for them, again, if you talk to them about it, they're just like, yeah, that was normal at the time.
Yeah.
Not that it didn't have an impact, and you can very clearly see the impact, but there's no vocabulary that they have. So if you look at like very clear expressions of anxiety or depression in the elder generations, it's never given that name. They're just like, उनका तो nature ही ऐसा है.
Yeah.
Hypertension.
हाँ, उनको तो
like,
tension
you
की,
have an anxiety disorder that has been bred
a
in
very
you.
clear anxiety
Yeah.
disorder.
Like you said, survival mode makes you truly have scarcity mindset. And by survival mode, I'm sure most people know, but like, could you explain a bit about what that is? Because I do think it applies to a lot of
Yeah.
people in our generation of what we grew up with.
Well, in survival mode, your brain is kind of like hyper focused on just that surviving. So there's like 3 responses. There's fight or flight or freeze. And the neurochemistry of that is still not fully understood, right? Because if you're in survival mode, your body is producing a lot more cortisol or a lot more like norepinephrine, which shuts down other parts of your body. Other parts of your brain, and kind of like directs all of your resources towards just surviving. So it'll be hyper focused on just like present dangers around you. Now, if there is like a chronic production of cortisol or norepinephrine, what happens is it affects other parts of your body. It can lead to like type 2 diabetes. It can lead to even loss of bone density. High blood pressure is a very, very common one.
Like, these are so common in South Asia. Pakistan में diabetes and blood ka issue and heart ka issue.
And also blood pressure.
Blood BP.
Yeah.
And they say heart attacks, this, that, and we keep saying you're taking on too much stress, and they're like, that has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
It's because of what I'm eating. I'm like, no, it all affects it.
Yeah, they
Each and
think it's like
everything.
it's two separate things. Your
Yeah.
psychology and your physiology are two separate things. They're really not.
Yeah. No.
They're completely like.
I thought everything was fine. I had a job, I had friends, I had my great family. Everything was fine in my life, and I kept thinking, what's happening to me? Because my body kept reacting differently. Like I would have panic attacks. I would, wake up in the middle of the night. I would have insomnia. All these weird things were happening to my body, and I was like, what's going on with me? Everything is fine. There's nothing affecting me. It was just years and years of pushing down feelings and not dealing with them, and then it would just explode out of me in different ways, but it was my body reacting, not my anything else reacting.
I'm wondering,
it's just-
is it like, are we taught to act like this because of generational trauma, or is it literally like baked into us that this is how we respond to things?
Or is it a
because-
personality thing?
Yeah, like what
Because I've
role does
always
it-
been told that I kind of don't deal with my emotions, and I push it away, and then until it bubbles up and bursts out of me. And I'm not the only person. That I've met a lot of other people like that as well. So where does this come from?
I
Since
think
we're dissecting
there is
me.
this like categorization of emotions as good or bad. So being happy, being relaxed, they're good emotions. Being sad,
Angry.
being angry, being stressed, those are considered bad emotions. And what that develops is like not a lot of acceptance or resilience of those states of mind, which are perfectly natural. There's this kind of like idea that there's something wrong with me if I am stressed, if I am angry. There's not a lot of healthy modeling of anger
Yeah.
for people either. And anger is a very, very like necessary emotion for survival. So
I'm literally angry all the time. So
No, but it's good you say that, because every time I am angry, I have my outburst or something comes out of me. After that, I'm fine. I actually automatically, everything else starts working. Once
Yeah.
it's my release, basically.
Yeah.
Anger is the emotion that I like most use. And
which
manage
is
it,
something
and
we're not
eventually
like
manage it.
taught to do as kids.
That's
So little kids, like if they're angry, if they're crying, there's instantly like, okay, stop crying,
Yeah.
don't cry. Or they'll be like, here's a candy, here's a distraction, something or the other. They're not taught to just like be
the crux
okay
of
with
my
like,
food
yeah.
issues just born right there.
Oh, I was overfed as a kid
Yeah.
for that very reason. Okay, if you're upset, like here's something, here's a little treat. Here's
Yeah.
KFC in my case. Even grown adults, if you see someone who's upset, there's this instant kind of rush to go and cheer them up. Oh, it's
Yeah.
going to be okay. Everything happens for a reason. This is just God testing you, stuff like that.
This is what is written.
This is what is written. Yeah.
I actually really like what you said about how parents, they can't sit in your distress. Like they don't, because I feel, me therapizing my parents, when I'm upset or when children are upset, parents view it as a failure themselves.
Parents over here, I feel like, because they're so involved in kids' lives, in their kids' lives, they feel times two what the kids are feeling. Do you think that's also something that plays on it?
Do you mean like they over empathize with child's distress?
Yeah.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
So with, I guess, like overly protective parenting, they're not going to give enough credit to the child for like their own kind of internal resilience.
Yeah.
'Cause-
I'm simply speaking, like if you look at Asia as a whole, right? Our parents are generally, like I'm generalizing it, very overprotective as compared to parents in the West. Parents in the West, I mean, at like 16, they're like, okay, go live your life. Our parents are like, you will never leave my home.
Yeah.
You are my baby. I'm like 40 years old. You are my baby. No, dude. Like,
How common is the subject of like marriage and parents and marriage? Like, do you feel that's a very common issue here? It's not that common. People don't feel comfortable talking about it, or it is?
It is. It's like, I think anyone who's in their 20s to 30s constantly goes through that parallel of like, acha, ab shaadi kar lo, like settle down. And even if it comes from a place of love, there is this automatic assumption that that's what settling down looks like. That is it. It's not like, oh, you've reached a certain milestone in your career. You've reached like other sort of, whatever other goals you have. But like marriage and kids is the main, and it's assumed that everyone wants kids.
Yeah.
I used to get this a lot, where my grandmother's friends would come up to me and be like, by the time I hit your age, I had like 3-4 kids, and like, now you're old, and like you're who.
They're like, you were haggard.
No, they were just like, you should settle down now, because in our generation, we were married at like 16, we were married at 18, we were married at 19. I'm like, at 16, if anyone proposed to me, then I was like I was a different person then. Like I feel like I'm ready to do it. Back then, I had no idea who I was.
Yeah.
So do you think, again, it comes back down to the generations not understanding each other, and for them that's normal, and for us it's...
And nobody prepares young women who do get married like early on for what motherhood is actually like, or for like what marriage actually looks like. So many women are just kind of like thrown into this deep end of, they're not prepared for the physical toll that having a child takes, the mental health toll, the emotional toll. It's a lot. So the idea that somebody wouldn't necessarily want to take that on early on in life or at all is just like, it's alien to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is something I especially feel with social media and stuff, because so many like people of the subcontinent, this constant topic comes up that like, y'all hated your husbands. I don't even know how much you like your kids. So why are you pushing us to join this same thing? So is that a product of generational trauma? Is it a part of like, they don't even think of it that, because some people are like, why are you pushing this evil onto others? And I'm like, I'm not sure they see it as evil. I feel like they see it as like part of the course.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
It's part of their society. It's part of their norm, part of their society. That's just the way to go about it.
Yeah, so for them, like, reproduction, or kind of like, that is one of the main legacies that people think that they can leave, right? And a lot of people now are, maybe not in Pakistan, but otherwise starting to like fight back against that, because they're just like, having a kid is a huge responsibility. They're aware of what happens if you don't have the emotional and mental capacity to actually like give those resources to your child.
Speaking of like generational stuff or whatever, so my whole family shifted to Pakistan a handful of years ago, and I think it was the first time in decades that my parents were really submerged back into it. And as we know, Pakistan has changed a lot in those decades. It's not the Pakistan they left, but like, it's interesting the way my parents have been like, instead of leaning hard into it, they're almost like, whoa. And my mom now really says it. She's like, I don't believe anyone should have a child unless they are damn sure that they are going to give 1,000% to that kid. First of all, they only wanted one. I was an accident. So like, maybe she's had these thoughts for a while, and she was like, damn it, this one now. But like, I found that really refreshing, because it's not an easy thing to say. And I believe she actually had this conversation with my grandmother like a few days ago. And my nanny was like, what are you saying? Like, this is why your daughters are ruined, because of these thoughts. And my mom was just like, I can't lie to them. Like, it's not easy.
And it's understandable, because for them, it wasn't a question of whether they wanted kids. Yeah. So a lot of parents, they'd be like, they still think it's this huge favor that they did to their kids by like feeding them and, housing them and sending them to school. And there's this constant pressure on people to be eternally grateful to their parents for doing all of those things. And a lot of people were like, but I didn't ask to be brought into this world.
Yeah, I say that all the time.
Right? That's a choice you took on. Yeah. But at the same time, being aware that in that generation, it wasn't really a choice that was offered to them.
Yeah,
so it was something that was just kind of thrust upon them. No wonder they're a little frustrated about like, well, what do we get out of it?
I think the last time I asked my dad to pay my phone bill a few years ago, he was just like, what the hell? And I literally was like, I didn't ask to be with you. And I was like, you made choices.
Yeah. I use that line too. Like, you brought me in. I wasn't even the first kid. You had like one boy, one girl. Yeah. I was definitely a choice.
Yeah, true. I was 100% an accident, and they loved that. So.
The generation after us, Gen Z, my favorite generation, I mean, I'm jealous of them. I want to be them because of the way that they fight back and they stand up for their rights, and they sit there and they're like, no, we're not going to do it, and no one can make us. It's a completely different world out there with these kids. How do you see that going, like with the different generations? And also, do you manage different generations?
Yeah. So I don't work with kids under the age of like 15.
Yeah.
But with Gen Z, I feel like there's two different types. So there's the kind but which is sort of like, rejecting all traditional norms, whether
Yeah.
it's in the workplace, that are all about fighting for their rights, that believe in like collective liberation. And a lot of like the activism that is really, really happening around the world is like because of them. It's
Yeah,
been
and it's fantastic.
inspirational. Yeah, it's absolutely
Yeah.
amazing. Then on the flip side, there's Gen Z that's like a little bit confused.
Those
You
are the
know?
ones that I've come across also.
Yeah.
Who don't laugh.
I'm laughing because I hope they watch this and they're like, Elhaam.
No,
Yeah.
I've also there's a whole other side of Gen Z which is very into them. Like they are totally shy, totally closed up, and I'm like, you're too young to have these kind of problems right now. You should be having little issues like, oh, a boy doesn't like me, or oh, my teacher yelled at me today, oh, my dad grounded me, or whatever. These are the problems you should be having. These are problems I had when I was at their age. But they have taken the world's problems upon themselves, and they're being crushed by them, and I feel really sad for them because I'm like, you should be a kid and live your life. And unfortunately, it's like, I mean, I don't know whether it's the world that they're growing up in or what. Like, please explain to me, because I feel bad for them.
I mean, the rise of like influencer culture, of consumer culture, has also like brought in a lot more things for them to aspire towards, right? Like at least I don't remember wanting that many things when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So suddenly there is like a lot more shame around not meeting a certain like aesthetic,
Yeah.
not like, having a certain level of wealth, a certain kind of like, okay, you need these devices just to kind of fit in. So there is that. And like that's what I was talking about. The other kind of Gen Z, there is this backlash against what they perceive to be woke culture. There's a whole like lot of women in their 20s or even younger who don't want to work. There's this backlash against feminism about women having fought for the right to work, because they're just like, I don't want to do it. Like, I've seen women doing it and they're still like struggling financially.
Sorry, I don't mean to flip back, but when you were talking about Gen Z, like taking on the whole world and essentially things like that, and feeling, I find them very inspiring in a lot of ways with the, collective liberation and things like that. But I think that that's kind of like the other side of it, where like collective liberation is also the weight on them. You're right. The fact that they might work their whole lives and never like reach retirement and things like that. And I think they feel like if they don't scream about it, and I'm glad they're screaming about it.
Because they see millennials who are still like drowning in college debt in their 40s.
Yeah.
They see millennials who are unable to like buy homes of their own, are moving back into their parents' houses, or are still stuck in
People,
their
and those are
I mean, at least over here, it's like socially, like,
Yeah.
acceptable,
It's- yeah.
but
Thank you.
It's
across the
interesting.
world.
I'm
Thank
seeing
you,
this
Pakistan.
conversation happening in the West now, where people are like, you can move back in. It's something to be ashamed of. And literally every other culture, look at me here. I'm talking about Latin culture, South American culture, Asian, African. All of us live at home for a very long time. Like,
And
it
it's
is
very
strictly a
normal.
Western strange thing.
Yeah.
The rest of us are very much doing it. And we build community. And trust me, we want out. A lot of us, and we can't get out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has its cons.
Yeah, it definitely has its cons.
Sorry, no, I was going to segue.
Yes, please.
I want to know, why is it that we keep blaming our parents, and they blame their parents, and they blame their parents? How do you break that cycle?
I think the intention behind recognizing generational trauma or the mistakes that were made in our upbringing is not to blame them. Because again, they were thrust into that position. They weren't given a lot of preparation. The notions of discipline that they were taught, a lot of people just did the best with what they could, even if it was incredibly harmful. The intention is not to blame them and constantly be angry with them, because that's not going to create like a lot of room for constructive engagement and growth. The intention is just to kind of like recognize, okay, this is what worked, this did not work.
Right.
To have compassion for their experiences as well, and to kind of like show them that they can also have compassion for their experiences.
I think compassion is what's missing here.
So if you talk to them, like
Sabah,
we said
compassion.
about these really difficult things that they went through as kids, and they're just like, yeah, but it's fine. It like happened back then. If you kind of like carry on that conversation forward without telling them, oh, no, that was horrible, that was bad, but you just let them talk about it, you'll see a lot more things coming up.
It's very corny, but like a few years ago on Instagram, literally just like one of those Pinterest quotes, was like, please remember, your parents are doing this for the first time too. Dude, so simple, but I'm not kidding. Obviously, I was clearly at a point where I was receptive to hearing it and I wanted to stop fighting. But that one sentence, boom, like hit me. And I've said it to my mom many times now where I'm like, dude, you never knew what it was like to have a 12-year-old. You didn't know what it meant to have a college-age daughter. You didn't know what it meant to have a daughter in a completely different world. I mean, our parents saw the invention of the internet, the invention of, smartphone. We did too, but I'm saying like their world went from booking a call across the world to this WhatsApp. And so that is where a lot of my compassion came. So thank you to that Pinterest quote that was probably shared by like girl with therapy.
I'm at that age where my mom had me, and I have no idea how to do this. If I ever did have a kid, I would be completely lost. And she had to do it. And there was no internet, or there's no guidebook, nothing. They just had the generation above them telling them what to do. They had community, thankfully. So I guess, so that's where I was like, it's okay. It's fine. If you made mistakes, it's fine. If you didn't do something a certain way that everyone else expected you to, that's okay. Because we were all just winging it.
Yeah. But what's really important is also if one's parents or family elders are open and receptive to those kinds of conversations, where there is that automatic gaslighting of no, like, be grateful, you got the best of everything. And like a lot of people, they actually are... They'll say this like, I'm glad I was beaten up as a kid. Like, it made me into the man that I am today. Like, these kids today are too soft and stuff.
Okay, first of all, I know I'm speaking from privilege because my parents have kind of always been ready to have conversations. And I know that is far from the norm in Pakistan. Yeah. But you're right. When I finally was like, chalo, they are also people. And they were children once. And they also... I feel the conversations I've had with my parents since have been a lot more constructive. And I'm not sitting there constantly being like, say sorry to me, say sorry to me. It's more so like their stuff. I keep wanting to say their shit. Their stuff has also come out. Yeah. Like you were saying, like, you'd be surprised. Like what the kind of stuff they've held to themselves because they were taught like sabr and silence. Like literally sabr and suffer in silence. And I've had amazing conversations, painful ones, but also really lighthearted ones. And I think it was just a few days ago, my dad was like, my mom didn't really hug me. My dad is not a hugger. It's me who's like forcibly holding him. And I was like, wow, I mean, I'm 35. That has never come up. And I've been forcing him to hug me for 35 years. And just now he was like,
but it could go either way, right? Like if there is someone who hasn't been coddled or hugged or whatever, they would want to do it differently when they have kids. That happens too. Right? Yeah. So then they switch and they flip and they hyper focus on what they didn't have. They would want.
They can also overcompensate. Yeah. So another side of this that I do want to talk about though is that like, so you've had families that were open to those conversations.
Yeah. Privilege.
Yeah, that's rare.
But
in this country, that's
open Facebook,
very rare.
And just you see these groups and the stuff that people, I'm traumatized by these groups. I talk about it quite a bit because the kind of conversations these girls are having and the kind of stuff that they're talking about, I'm like, why did no one talk to you about any of this? Why have you been pushed into the deep end?
Because also still not cultural definition of respect is still like it restricts a lot of conversations. Yeah. So there are plenty of people who still cannot engage in those conversations with their parents because it's just considered disrespectful, and respect is considered like a one-way street where you have to respect someone just because they're like older or just because they're your parent. Because of that notion of respect, you must always speak in a certain way, you must not go there. A lot of conversations are not had, and that kind of like keeps things the way they... If they're not addressed, I mean people end up carrying them.
It's very simple to just add the taboo tag on it and then no one ever talks about it. But if they actually did talk about it, you would actually solve a lot of things.
And this idea that no matter what, you must respect your parents. You must.
Sometimes it's not even about fear and respect. There's so much shame in standing up for yourself, or even just standing up for your opinion.
Yeah.
Like, I have seen my own family members, women, and cousins, like, shut down at a dinner table because some man in my family has decided that is the point and that is the truth, and no one can step against him because of who he is, you know?
A lot of it is about power, right?
Okay.
It's made into this big kind of like, oh, this is our tradition, these are our cultural values. A lot of it is about power, because you see families where people are making decisions for their kids based off of what the grandparents want or what like the uncles and aunts want for them.
Dude, down to even the names of their children.
Yeah. And so they see their kids as extensions of themselves instead of like these individual human beings with wishes of their own. And a lot of that is just like, it's their things that are projected onto their kids. So they're not going to stand up for themselves, but they're also not going to stand up for their kids when it comes to like the family elders, you know, imposing. So
I'll
it's
leave
really-
this one, parents, but I hope you're listening.
You're absolutely right. That's exactly what it is. That you hit it right on the nail. They think that they're extensions. That they don't see them as individuals.
When I think about parents like not understanding you, I think one of the first things is like, I'm experiencing anxiety, and they're like, we walked to Pakistan. You don't get to be anxious.
Absolutely.
Shut up. Like, you know,
Absolutely.
literally, they're like, we raised you. We're the anxious ones. Look at what you are. So can we talk a bit about that?
why are you anxious?
Yeah.
Why?
Kiss Kushi mein. I'm like, Kushi mein nahi. That's what I'm
So
saying.
much.
Yeah. So about that, like about the access to therapy language now because of social media.
You
Maybe
see
the
a lot
danger
of kids.
it.
You see a
Yeah,
lot
yeah.
of kids who may not even be suffering from like proper serious disorders, and they just throw these words around because they see them on social media or it's a hashtag or whatever, and that's dangerous.
So again, nuance plays a huge role in this. And in the therapy room, what you have is like detailed discussions that include all the little complexities. With Instagram pop psychology, you have like these bite-sized, you know, little bits of advice that sound great, but they really don't apply to every single thing. We don't understand that Instagram also works in that the algorithm is just feeding you more of what you already know and want to believe. In the therapy room, there is actual like constructive challenge that is posed to you. It's not about like over intellectualizing. It's about actually like questioning what you know. Even if you've read a lot on psychology, even if you've read all the self-help books out there, there's a lot about just kind of like sitting with the difficulties of life, not trying to solve every single thing. And that's what part of resilience is, like creating enough space to feel grief. There is existential grief that exists. The world that we currently live in, anxiety and depression are also very, very natural responses to it. So to pathologize that, ki acha, there is something wrong with this. Like, for example, when people are overexposed to, you know, graphic images or like images from the conflict, not conflict, from what's happening in Palestine, there was this whole kind of like, a lot of people said, this is affecting me too much. It's something I'm helpless over. Like, I'm sorry, but my self-care dictates that I can't engage with this. And other people went and said, like, well, how can you be worrying about your self-care? Like, that's coming from a place of so much privilege, and healing happens collectively. Like, you cannot exist. You cannot thrive in an environment that doesn't look out for your well-being. So this is what we do collectively as a society. So it's, I guess, like navigating, it's not going to either extreme. There is such a thing as like overexposing yourself to things that are outside of your control. You can keep both in. You can kind of like manage your self-care, manage your own capacity while still like keeping some space open to engage with things that are difficult. It's okay to feel anxiety. It's okay to feel depressed some days. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Those are natural human responses. When you look out for it as if it's becoming chronic, if it's impairing like your relationships and your functionality on a day-to-day basis, is then when you kind of like scale back and treat it. But
how is it that once you identify what's going on, what paths should you take to get to that healing process? I won't say that you snap your finger and it'll be okay. Of course, nothing is like that.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach. For some people, therapy is like a very important tool that helps them. For others, it's meditation, mindfulness. For others, it's like engaging in some kind of meaningful work that helps them feel that they have some kind of impact. Exercise, things like gratitude, it sounds cliched, but it's been shown to be clinically effective in treating those things. So yeah, none of us are special in that it won't work for us. Not going towards toxic positivity, but like, yeah, just kind of building resilience, building acceptance, building honest engagement, seeking social support around it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to push that again because it's a point you also made earlier, which was like resilience in feeling grief and feeling the stress. As Elhaam mentioned earlier, she was like, "Boo, get away from me." But that's how you build yourself up. Another thing I like you said, because I think when people hear therapy in Pakistan, there is the conversation of accessibility. But you're saying like it might not even be for everyone, and there are other things that you can try.
We talked about this. I said that when I did try it out, I felt like it didn't work for me. But there are other things that I do that I feel are therapy for me. Like I genuinely manage my emotions better and feel a lot better when it comes to music. Music I use as a tool to wind down or to de-stress or when I'm not feeling great, I use that and it actually works for me. It may not work for everyone else, but it does work for me. And different people react differently to different things. So we were talking about this, and she validated me, so I'm very happy.
Talk therapy is just one medium, and it has its limitations. So for someone who can be a little bit like predisposed to intellectualizing their experience and their emotions, talk therapy is perhaps not great because they'll just kind of like,
I also feel it because I'm a performer. So I found myself in every therapy session being like, ba-dum-dum. Like I kept making the therapist laugh and making my therapist enjoy spending time with me. And I was like, oh my God, I am performing patient.
Client.
I am performing client. Like this is wild to me. Like I gotta stop,
So music, art, movement, those are also like different forms of therapy that can help us kind of like break out of the
washing dishes,
cognitive mind.
That's the thing that I do.
Mopping for me, I'm a big fan of mopping my place.
Important to distinguish, however, between like distractions and actually like.
She's like, please do not take mental health advice from these two dumbos.
There are things that are therapeutic, and then there's things that are therapy.
Yeah,
fair. Okay, very good point. Very good point. Last thing I want to do before we close out, my last question, and again, questions that only I have. When you're constantly, and this is something we touched upon earlier, when you're constantly sitting there with talk therapy, you're taking on the burdens of all of these people that are coming to you on a day-to-day basis. How do you wind down? Like, does it affect you? Does it burden you?
It can. Some days it can be difficult, but part of the job is learning how to contain.
Right.
That's why there are very strong like boundaries around it. There's not a lot of communication outside of session. Except for like scheduling purposes or if there's an emergency. And there is that transactional nature of it. Right, and that like if I'm being paid, it is to create that 1 hour, 50 minutes of time, which is now purely dedicated to this person. It's not like equal, me in that space. Having said that, it can get difficult because we're human.
Right.
So sometimes you do absorb things, and part of the work entails like really watching out for that, being able to contain, because it's not in service of the client. If I'm going around now carrying and feeling and carrying their baggage for them, it does nothing for them.
Right. But that would also be an issue, right? Like creating those boundaries, because as Pakistanis, we have no boundaries.
That's actually why I quit one therapist, because I was telling her something and she was trying to like get the gossip out of me of who I was talking about. And I was like, lady, I was like, I don't think this is working out. And she was like, you're just not ready. And I was like, I was like, I just don't want to gossip with you. I mean, I do, but that's the problem.
Yeah, no, it's not the. That's.
Yeah, don't worry.
That's a whole other way.
That's a different issue.
I stopped my sessions immediately.
But having said that, like apart from the boundaries, it's also very, very rewarding. On some days, you just like you come out of it. It reaffirms everything that you believe in about mental health and the research that has been done thus far, because you see the trajectory.
Right.
that clients take. It's sometimes very dynamic work, seeing the people that come out and like, it's all the work that they're doing. A good therapist's job is just to facilitate a space where the client kind of like explores, plays around, grows on
Right.
their own.
Right.
And so witnessing that is kind of amazing too.
And on that note,
Thank you so
Thank you
much,
so
Anum, for
much
joining
for
us
having me.
today.
this has been very, I got validated once again on this podcast. So thank you so much for coming in and speaking to us about all of this. And we've just scratched the surface.
We'll have you back.
We'll have you back for
Yeah,
sure.
if you're down. We said that very threateningly. All right, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.